Did you know that the Bible actually teaches us to use science to learn about God? Scripture is constantly telling us that the study of nature will point us to God. Since studying nature is doing science, the Bible teaches that we should do science to learn about God. There are several examples in Scripture showing us how important it is for us to know about the universe. The Old Testament teaches that Solomon was wiser than any other man. First King lists some of the topics about which Solomon was wise. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish. King Solomon was a naturalist. God chose to give biological knowledge to Solomon, which he then shared with the people of all nations. Information about the natural world, also called science, must be important to God. Solomon understood this when he said in Proverbs 6, "Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways, and be wise." Psalm 8 then compares the universe to God. "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him?" We obviously have to know about nature in order for this comparison to work. We must already have done some science in order to see how great God is. For example, when we look at the incredible immenseness of the universe, we realize how much God must care to pay attention to us. The more we learn about how fine-tuned the moon and the stars have to be for life to exist on earth, the more we see the love that God has for us. Psalm 19 directly tells us that the universe will teach us about God. So we need to do some cosmology, some astronomy, and some geology to see that the heavens actually do declare the glory of God. Here's Psalm 19. "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge." When we get to the New Testament, Paul actually begins with science when speaking to the Gentiles. In chapter 14 of Acts, Paul is speaking to the people in Lystra who had tried to make him and Barnabas into the gods Hermes and Zeus. Paul, of course, tells them that he and Barnabas are just men, but then he adds, "You should turn from these vain things to a living God who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them." Paul then goes on to say that nature can testify to this God. So in Acts 14, we find the first recorded evangelistic message to an audience with no background in Judaism. Instead of starting and sharing the Old Testament prophecy with them, the special revelation that the Jews would understand, he starts with what they already know, and that's natural revelation or science. So the greatest evangelist in history, Paul, actually begins with science when telling non-Christians about Jesus. Science can be a perfect starting point for evangelism today as well. Many people have at least a cursory knowledge of science, while the number of people that have no knowledge of the Bible or of Christianity is increasing. Our society also tends to take scientific knowledge as truth, while it tends to be skeptical of spiritual knowledge. So, back to Paul. The early Christian writers all found Greek philosophy, part of which was science, a useful tool in the defense of Christianity. The Apostle Paul accepted and knew all the science of the day, teaching that knowledge of the natural world will point you to the correct creator. Now, much of Paul's speech to the Epicureans and the Stoics at the Areopagus in Athens seem to allude to Stoic beliefs. Now, the Stoics could be reasonably described as the logic teachers and the physicists of the day, so Paul, using their teachings, reflects sympathy with pagan customs. Paul appeals for a new examination of divinity from practical engagement with the world. He doesn't ask them to throw out their science. He instead asks them to look at it with new eyes and see how nature points to God. Early in his speech at the Areopagus, Paul tells us about the God who made the world and everything in it. Paul's beginning point here is again with nature, pointing to the created world to show that the Christian God, while having created everything, is actually too great to be worshipped as part of the created world. Paul explains in Romans 1 why he chooses to begin with science when talking to those with no background in Judaism or Christianity. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. Paul champions natural theology and a critical reflection of the natural world. When we do science, we are looking at creation, which can then point us to the Creator. This idea was not unique to Paul. St. Clement of Rome, the first apostolic father of the church, who was discipled by the apostle Peter, accepted a good deal of Greek mathematics and astronomy, including the belief that the earth was spherical. St. Clement of Rome, though, disagreed with Aristotle on the nature of the earth, teaching instead that the earth was not eternal and that it, like all of creation, was created by God, but different and distinct from God. So in the first century, Clement was providing a starting point for the rise of modern science by also affirming that nature was orderly and distinct and separate from God. So the writers of the Old Testament tell us to use science to learn about God. In the New Testament, Paul uses science as a beginning point to tell people about Jesus. Scripture is constantly telling us that the study of nature, that doing science, will point us to God. Christianity is not anti-science.